3 identical pairs of dark gray eyes stared at her across the marble dining table. One boy gripped a shattered porcelain teacup, milk dripping between his small fingers onto a rug that cost more than her annual salary. Another had somehow climbed onto the table itself, his expensive leather shoes leaving prints across the polished surface. The third sat perfectly still, watching her with an unsettling intensity that belonged on a man 3 decades older. Behind them, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline, stood the most dangerous man she had ever met. Kwon Moo-hyuk didn't apologize. He didn't move to intervene. He simply adjusted his cufflink and said, "These are my sons. They will be spending considerable time with you. If you find this arrangement uncomfortable, you are free to leave." His voice carried no warmth. His expression revealed nothing. But Nkiru-ese understood exactly what this was. A test. A weapon. A deliberate attempt to destroy something before it could begin. She looked at the chaos surrounding her, the broken cup, the ruined table, the milk seeping into priceless fabric, and then she did something that made every person in that penthouse stop breathing. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment where you're watching from so I can know how far across the world this story has traveled. Kiru lowered herself to the floor. Not gracefully. Not elegantly. She simply folded her legs beneath her professional skirt and sat on the cold marble, bringing herself below the eye level of all 3 children. The boy on the table froze mid-step. The one holding the broken cup loosened his grip slightly. Quiet one, the one who had been studying her like a threat assessment, tilted his head. "That cup looked expensive," Nkiru said calmly, addressing the child with milk-covered hands. "Did it hurt when it broke?" The question clearly wasn't what he expected. His small brow furrowed. "It didn't hurt me," he said carefully. "It's just a cup. I meant your hands. Porcelain can be sharp." He glanced down at his fingers, then back at her. "I'm fine." "Good." Kiru nodded toward the boy on the table. "And you, do you prefer being tall or do you just like the view from up there?" For a moment, nobody moved. Then the corner of the table climber's mouth twitched. "The view," he admitted. "Fair enough. But that table probably isn't designed for standing. If you want to see the whole city, I can show you where the best window is." She paused. "After you come down." He hesitated, clearly weighing whether this stranger could be trusted. Then, slowly, he lowered himself back into his chair. Across the room, Moo-hyuk's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His right hand, resting against his thigh, stopped moving entirely. The dragon tattoo coiling from behind his ear down toward his collarbone seemed to shift in the penthouse lighting as his posture changed. This wasn't supposed to happen. The woman was supposed to recoil. She was supposed to make excuses. She was supposed to look at his 3 notoriously difficult children who had driven away 7 nannies in 18 months, and decide that whatever connection she imagined with him wasn't worth the chaos. Instead, she was sitting on his floor, speaking to his sons like they were reasonable human beings rather than weapons he had deliberately deployed. "The quiet one," Nkiru said, turning to the third boy, the one who still hadn't spoken. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. But if you're worried about whether I'm staying or leaving, I can tell you now." She met his gaze directly. "I don't run because someone expects me to." The boy's eyes widened slightly. Then, for the first time, he looked away from her, toward his father. Moo-hyuk said nothing. But his expression had changed. Calculated coldness was still there, but beneath it, something else flickered. Something he hadn't felt in years. Uncertainty. 3 weeks earlier, Kwon Moo-hyuk had made a decision that would eventually destroy everything he understood about himself. He had noticed her. Kiru-ese had entered his world as a consultant, hired by his legitimate corporation to coordinate a high-profile international business summit. She was Nigerian. Professional. Intelligent. She spoke 4 languages fluently and carried herself with a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with wealth or status. Most importantly, she didn't seem afraid of him. That should have been a warning. The first time they met, he had watched her correct one of his senior executives in front of an entire boardroom. She had done it calmly, professionally, without raising her voice, but the executive had left the meeting humiliated, and Muhayak had found himself inexplicably entertained. The second time they met, she had refused to adjust a scheduling conflict to accommodate his preferences. "Your time is valuable," she had said, gathering her documents. "So is mine. We'll find a solution that respects both." No one spoke to him like that. No one. And yet, instead of having her removed from the project, he had found himself agreeing. By the third meeting, he realized he was looking for excuses to see her. By the fourth, he understood exactly what was happening and exactly how dangerous it was. Kwon Muhayak controlled one of Seoul's largest underground criminal networks. His legitimate businesses were fronts for shipping operations, security companies, and financial systems that moved billions through shadows. His enemies were patient. They were watching. They were waiting for him to reveal a vulnerability they could exploit. For 15 years, he had given them nothing. No wife. No public relationships. No emotional attachments that could be weaponized against him. His triplets existed in a fortress of security. They attended private schools with armed guards. They lived in penthouses with bulletproof windows. They were protected not because Muhayak was sentimental, but because they were his legacy, and legacies required preservation. But they were also isolated. And so was he. The night he realized he was developing feelings for Nkiru, Muhayak made the coldest decision of his life. He would destroy the possibility of a relationship before it could begin. He would do it in a way that made her choose to leave. He would use his children. "They're testing you," Han Ji-suk said quietly, standing beside Muhayak as they watched Nkiru through a security monitor. All three of them. At the same time. On the screen, Nkiru was attempting to supervise the triplets' lunch. Seo-woo had already accidentally knocked over his glass twice. Seo-jun was methodically rearranging his food into patterns instead of eating it. Seo-hyun hadn't touched anything at all. "That's what children do," Muhayak replied flatly. "Most adults would have quit by now." Ji-suk's eyes flicked toward his employer. "Most adults did quit. 7 times. She's stubborn. She's something." Ji-suk paused. "Boss? Permission to speak freely?" A slight nod. "You brought her here to make her afraid of you." Ji-suk's voice carried the weight of 15 years of loyalty. "Somehow, you're the one who's afraid now." Muhayak didn't respond. On the monitor, Seo-hyun, the sensitive one, the one who never spoke to strangers, had shifted his chair closer to Nkiru's. He wasn't eating, but he was watching her with something that looked almost like hope. "Increase security around the children," Muhayak said abruptly. "I want additional personnel on all transportation routes." Ji-suk frowned. "Has there been a threat?" Muhayak turned away from the screen. "There's always a threat." Mrs. Adebayo had been caring for the triplets since their birth. She had weathered their tantrums, their illnesses, their nightmares. She had watched them grow from fragile infants into guarded, intelligent children who trusted almost no one. She had also watched 7 carefully selected caregivers flee in tears. So when she returned from her day off and found Seo-hyun sitting beside Nkiru on the playroom floor, voluntarily showing her his favorite book, Mrs. Adebayo stopped in the doorway and simply stared. "He doesn't do that," she said later, cornering Nkiru in the kitchen. Her Nigerian accent carried the same warmth Nkiru remembered from her own grandmother. "That boy hasn't shown his books to anyone since his second nanny left." "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Nkiru said honestly. "I just listened." "You listened." Mrs. Adebayo's narrowed. "To a 6-year-old who barely speaks?" "He speaks. Just not with words." Nkiru glanced toward the playroom, where all 3 boys were now engaged in what appeared to be a complicated negotiation involving toy cars. "They all do." Seo-jun communicates through protection. He positions himself between his brothers and anything unfamiliar. Seo-woo communicates through chaos. He breaks things because negative attention is still attention. And Seo-hyun. She paused. Seo-hyun watches. He's waiting to see if people will stay. Mrs. Adebayo was quiet for a long moment. Their mother left, she finally said, when they were 18 months old. She couldn't handle, she gestured vaguely. This. The security. The isolation. The man their father is. He told you that? Mr. Kwon doesn't tell anyone anything. Mrs. Adebayo's voice softened. But I've been here long enough to understand. Those boys have been waiting for someone to stay since they were old enough to understand that people leave. Karu thought about the penthouse's endless corridors. The armed guards at every entrance. The way Muhyok's staff moved around him like planets orbiting a distant, dangerous sun. Does he know, she asked, that his children are lonely? Mrs. Adebayo smiled sadly. My dear girl. He's the loneliest person in this entire building. The confrontation happened on the 9th day. Karu had spent nearly 2 weeks navigating the triplets' combined chaos. She had learned that Seo-jun would only eat vegetables if she ate them first. She had discovered that Seo-woo's mischief decreased dramatically when given responsibilities. He was currently in charge of watering a small plant, which he treated with unexpected seriousness. She had figured out that Seo-hyun would eventually speak if she simply sat beside him and waited, never pushing, never demanding. But she had also noticed something else. Every interaction she had with the children was monitored. Every meal, every story, every moment in the playroom, somewhere a camera was recording. Somewhere Muhyok was watching. And not once had he actually spoken to her since that first day. Not once had he asked how his children were doing. Not once had he checked whether they were happy. On the 9th day, she found him in his study. He was reviewing documents, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the full black and gray realism sleeves covering both arms. Korean tigers, mountain landscapes, prayer beads, ancient calligraphy. Tattoos told stories of discipline, violence, and buried grief. His knuckles read honor and power. You're using them, Kiru said without preamble. Muhyok's pen stopped moving. He didn't look up. Excuse me. Your children. You brought them into my life deliberately. You expected me to fail. You wanted me to leave. Slowly, he raised his gaze. Those dark gray eyes were unreadable. And yet you're still here. Because they need someone. Kiru stepped closer to his desk. They need someone who isn't afraid to sit with them. Someone who doesn't flinch when they act out. Someone who understands that their behavior isn't about being difficult, it's about being terrified. Terrified. His voice was flat. Of what? Of being abandoned again. The silence stretched between them like a blade. You don't know anything about my family, Muhyok said quietly. I know enough. Kiru held his gaze. I know Seo-jun sleeps with a flashlight because he's afraid of what might come in the dark. I know Seo-woo breaks things because it's the only way anyone pays attention to him. I know Seo-hyun hasn't spoken more than 10 words to any adult outside Mrs. Adebayo in the past year. Something flickered in Muhyok's expression. Something raw. And I know, Kiru continued, that you brought me here expecting chaos would drive me away. But those children aren't chaos. They're lonely. They're scared. And they're desperate for someone to love them without being afraid of who their father is. Muhyok stood. The movement was controlled, deliberate, but Nkiru saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands pressed flat against the desk. You should be afraid, he said quietly. Of who I am. Should I? Yes. Why? He moved around the desk, closing the distance between them with slow, measured steps. The dragon tattoo seemed to shift in the study's dim lighting. His presence filled the room entirely, dangerous, magnetic, overwhelming. Because everyone who gets close to me eventually becomes a target, he said. Everyone I care about becomes a weapon my enemies can use. Everyone, he stopped, close enough that she could smell sandalwood and smoke. Everyone leaves. Eventually. Whether they choose to or not. Kiru looked up at him. She was not small, but he towered over her, all coiled tension and barely controlled intensity. Is that what happened to their mother? His expression shuddered instantly. This conversation is over. No. Kiru didn't move. It isn't. Because you brought me into your children's lives as a weapon against yourself. You used their loneliness to protect yourself from feeling something. And now you're angry because your plan didn't work. Muak's jaw tightened. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Kiru's voice was calm, but something fierce burned beneath it. You're not afraid of your enemies. You're afraid of yourself. You're afraid that if you let anyone close enough to matter, you'll have to admit that you're just as lonely as those 3 little boys upstairs. The silence that followed was devastating. For a long moment, Muhayak didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe. Then, very quietly, he said something she didn't expect. Their mother didn't leave because of the danger. Kira waited. She left because I couldn't be what she needed. His voice was barely above a whisper. I was already this. By the time the boys were born, I had already built an empire on violence and control. She thought I would change. She thought the children would soften me. Did they? His eyes met hers. I don't know how to be soft, he said. I only know how to survive. Things changed after that. Not dramatically. Not obviously. But the distance between them began to close in ways neither could fully explain. Muhayak started appearing at mealtimes. He didn't participate. He sat at the head of the table reviewing documents, speaking little, but he was present. Watching. Listening. Seojun noticed first. He began positioning his chair closer to his father's. Small shifts. Subtle movements. Attempts to close a gap that had existed for years. Seowoo noticed second. He started seeking his father's attention through smaller acts, asking permission before moving furniture, showing his drawings, reporting on his plant's progress. Each time, he watched Muhayak's face for approval. Seohyun noticed third. But he didn't move closer to his father. He moved closer to Nkiru. By the 4th week, Mrs. Adebayo pulled Nkiru aside with tears in her eyes. Whatever you're doing, she whispered, don't stop. I haven't seen those boys this settled since they were infants. Nkiru didn't know what to say. Because she wasn't doing anything extraordinary. She was simply staying. The Nigerian food happened by accident. Nkiru had been craving jollof rice for weeks. Proper jollof rice, not the approximation available at fusion restaurants in Gangnam. On a rare afternoon off, she had found ingredients at an international market and commandeered a corner of the penthouse kitchen. She hadn't expected the triplets to follow her. What's that? Seowoo asked, standing on his toes to peer into the pot. Rice. It doesn't look like rice. It's Nigerian rice. Different spices. Different method. Seojun appeared beside his brother. Father says we should only eat Korean food. Does he? Kiru stirred the pot calmly. Well, I'm not feeding you this. I'm making it for myself. 3 identical pairs of gray eyes widened. But we can smell it, Seohyun said quietly, the most words he had spoken to her in a single sentence. Kiru pretended to consider this. I suppose if you wanted to try a small taste purely for educational purposes. 20 minutes later, all 3 boys had tomato-stained lips and empty bowls, and Seowoo was demanding to know how something this orange could taste this good. Muhayak found them like that. His children clustered around the kitchen island, eating food he had never seen before, laughing at something the Nigerian woman had said. He stopped in the doorway. For a moment, he simply watched. Triplets looked different. Not guarded. Not performing. Not watching for threats. They looked like children. Like ordinary, happy children who weren't afraid of what might happen next. Kiru looked up and met his gaze. Something passed between them. Something that felt like possibility. "There's more," she said quietly. "If you're hungry." Muyak hesitated. Then he walked into the kitchen, pulled out a chair and sat down. The danger began 2 days later. Jisuk appeared in Muhyak's study with an expression that immediately shifted the room's atmosphere. "We have a problem." Muhyak set down his pen. "Explain." Cha Min-suk has been asking questions. About the children's schedules. About school transportation routes. About, Jisuk hesitated. About the woman. Temperature in the room dropped. "How does he know about her?" "We don't know. But someone's been watching the penthouse. Surveillance we didn't detect. We only found traces today." Muhyak's hands curled into fists beneath his desk. His knuckles, honor and power, whitened. "Where are the children now?" "Playroom. With Mrs. Adebayo and Miss Ease. Increase security to maximum. Cancel all external appointments. Lock down transportation." Jisuk nodded, already moving toward the door. Then he paused. "Boss, if Min-suk is targeting the family, this could become very complicated. Very fast." "I know. The woman shouldn't be here. She's not protected. She's not trained. She stays." Muhyak's voice cut through the air. "She stays until I decide otherwise." Jisuk studied his employer for a long moment. Understood. Cha Min-suk had been waiting for this opportunity for 7 years. He was patient, methodical, strategic. He had built his own criminal network through careful cultivation of Muhyak's disaffected former allies, through exploitation of business vulnerabilities, through quiet elimination of anyone who stood in his path. But Muhyak had always been untouchable. The man had no weaknesses, no emotional attachments, no pressure points that could be exploited. He protected his assets ruthlessly and discarded anything or anyone that could compromise his position. 4 years Min-suk had searched for an opening. Now he had found one. Triplets had always been protected. But protected wasn't the same as loved. Min-suk had assumed they were simply legacy insurance, future heirs to be molded, not treasured. Then his surveillance had captured something unexpected. Kwon Muhyak, the coldest man in Seoul's underworld, sitting in his own kitchen, eating unfamiliar food, watching a Nigerian woman make his children laugh. The expression on his face had been unmistakable. Vulnerability. Min-suk smiled as he reviewed the footage. "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting." The first incident happened a week later. The triplet school transportation, a heavily armored vehicle with trained security personnel, was followed by an unfamiliar car for 3 miles before the pursuit was abandoned. Nothing happened. No attack materialized. But the message was clear. We know where they are. We can reach them. Muhyak pulled the boys from school immediately. Temporary homeschooling. Complete lockdown. The children didn't understand why they suddenly couldn't leave the penthouse. Seo-jun became sullen and suspicious. Seo-woo's mischief escalated dramatically. Seo-hyun stopped eating. Kira watched all of this with growing unease. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked Muhyak directly, finding him alone in his study late one evening. He was staring out the window at Seoul's lights, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "Nothing that concerns you. Everything about those children concerns me now. You made sure of that." She moved to stand beside him. "Something happened. Something changed. The security has tripled. The boys aren't allowed outside. Mrs. Adebayo is terrified, even though she won't say why. Muhayak was silent for a long moment. There are people, he finally said, who want to hurt me. They've been looking for ways to hurt me for years. Now they think they've found one. The children. Yes. Kiru absorbed this. And me. He turned to look at her. In the low light, his features seemed carved from shadow. You should leave, he said quietly. I can arrange protection. Safe transportation out of the country. A new position. A new life. Is that what you want? Question hung between them. What I want, Muhayak said slowly, doesn't matter. I've spent my entire life making sure that what I want never compromises what I need to do. That sounds exhausting. A ghost of something, not quite a smile, flickered across his face. It is. Kiru was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that made him go completely still. I'm not leaving. Miss Ease. Nkiru. My name is Nkiru. She held his gaze. And I'm not leaving those boys. Not because someone is threatening them. Not because you're trying to protect me. Not because you're afraid. You don't understand what these people are capable of. No. I don't. Her voice was steady. But I understand what those children are capable of feeling. I understand what it would do to them if another person walked out of their lives because staying was too difficult. Muhayak's expression cracked. Just for a moment. Just enough to reveal the devastation beneath. I can't protect you, he whispered. Not fully. Not if they decide. Then we protect each other. Kiru reached out and placed her hand over his. His skin was warm. His pulse was rapid. That's what families do. The word hung between them like a question. Family. Muhayak looked at her hand on his. Looked at her face. Looked at the woman who should have run weeks ago but who had instead planted herself in the center of his most dangerous life like she belonged there. You're making a mistake, he said. Maybe. Kiru's grip tightened slightly. But it's my mistake to make. The second incident was worse. One of Muhayak's trusted security personnel disappeared. 3 days later, a package arrived at the penthouse containing a personal item that belonged to Seo Hyun, a small toy he had lost months ago at the park. The message was impossible to misunderstand. We have been close enough to touch them. The triplets didn't know about the package. But they felt the shift in atmosphere. The additional guards. The locked doors. The way their father suddenly appeared at odd hours, checking their rooms, watching them sleep. Is someone trying to hurt us? Seojun asked Nkiru quietly one afternoon, while his brothers were distracted by a puzzle. Kiru's heart clenched. There are always people who want to hurt the ones we love, she said carefully. But your father would never let that happen. Neither would I. Seojun studied her with those disconcertingly adult eyes. You're not leaving? No. Promise. Kiru knelt to meet his gaze. I promise that no matter what happens, I will always come back to you. I will always find you. You, your brothers, this family, you're not problems I'm trying to solve. You're people I've chosen to love. Something in Seojun's carefully controlled expression crumbled. And then he was crying. Kiru held him. She held him while his brothers abandoned their puzzle and climbed onto her lap, attracted by the unfamiliar sound of their stoic siblings showing emotion. She held all three of them, there on the playroom floor, surrounded by toys and scattered pieces, while somewhere in the building their father was waging a war they didn't understand. She didn't know that Muhayak was watching through the security monitors. She didn't know that for the first time in 15 years, he was questioning everything he had built. She didn't know that he was already planning something that would change all of their lives forever. Confrontation with Cha Min-suk happened at a location neither chose. A charity gala. Neutral ground. Hundreds of Seoul's elite gathered in a glittering ballroom, unaware that among them moved men who could destroy cities with a phone call. Muhayak had not wanted to attend. But his absence would have signaled fear, and fear in his world invited attack. He brought Nkiru. It was dangerous. Reckless. Possibly the worst decision he had made in years. But he couldn't leave her at the penthouse. Not now. Not when Minsuk's surveillance had already proven how far his reach extended. She wore gold that night. A dress that caught the light like fire against her deep brown skin. Her natural curls were styled elegantly. Her presence commanded attention from the moment she entered the ballroom. Muhayak couldn't stop watching her. Dangerous, Jisuk murmured beside him. You're making yourself obvious. I'm aware. Minsuk is here. Southeast corner. He's been watching you both since you arrived. Muhayak didn't look. Didn't need to. Let him watch. Confrontation came during the intermission. Minsuk approached them near the champagne fountain, all smiles and false warmth. He was handsome in a calculated way, sharp features, expensive suit, predator's eyes. Muhayak, he said smoothly. It's been too long. Not long enough. Minsuk's smile didn't waver. His gaze shifted to Nkiru. And this must be the woman everyone's been talking about. The one who's captured Seoul's Ice King. He extended his hand. Cha Minsuk. An old business associate of your companion. Nkiru looked at his hand but didn't take it. I know who you are, she said calmly. Minsuk's smile flickered. Do you? Interesting. I wonder what stories he's told you. Enough stories. Nkiru's voice was steady. And enough about you that I know exactly what kind of man offers his hand while plotting destruction with the other. The silence that followed was deafening. Muhayak felt something shift inside him. Pride. Fierce, unexpected pride in this woman who stood beside him and refused to perform for his enemies. Minsuk's mask finally cracked. Just slightly. Just enough to reveal the darkness beneath. Careful, he murmured. You're playing in waters you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Nkiru stepped closer to Muhayak, her shoulder brushing his arm. I understand that you're afraid of him. I understand that you've been circling for years, looking for weakness, finding nothing. I understand that when you finally found something, she paused. You still couldn't touch it. Minsuk's eyes narrowed. Everything can be touched, he said softly. Everyone can be broken. Ask him how many people he's lost. He turned and walked away before either could respond. Muhayak's hand found Nkiru's beneath the cover of her dress. His grip was tight. Almost painful. You shouldn't have done that, he said quietly. Probably not. He's going to accelerate whatever he's planning. I know. She looked up at him. Are you ready? For a moment, he simply stared at her. This woman who had walked into his life by accident and refused to leave by choice. This woman who had transformed his children with nothing but patience and presence. This woman who had just publicly challenged one of Seoul's most dangerous criminals and hadn't blinked. I don't know, he admitted. But I'm going to protect you anyway. We're going to protect each other, she corrected softly. Yes. His voice was rough. We are. The attack came 3 nights later. 12 armed men breached the penthouse's secondary security perimeter. They were professionals, silent, efficient, coordinated. They neutralized the outer guards within minutes. The alarm woke the entire household. Muhayak moved faster than Nkiru had ever seen him move. Within seconds, he was armed, dressed, commanding his remaining personnel through rapid Korean. Take the children to the panic room, he ordered her. Mrs. Adebayo knows where. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. No matter what you hear. Muhayak. Promise me. She looked at his face. Saw the fear he couldn't hide. I promise. He kissed her. It was brief. Desperate. Collision of months of restrained desire compressed into 3 seconds. Then he was gone. Kiru gathered the triplets, confused, frightened, still half asleep, and followed Mrs. Adebayo through a hidden corridor she had never known existed. Panic Room was reinforced steel and bulletproof glass, equipped with supplies for a week-long siege. "Will father be okay?" Seojun asked, his voice small. "Yes," Kiru said firmly. "Your father is going to protect us." That's what he does. But outside she could hear gunshots. And she wasn't sure she believed her own words. The battle lasted 47 minutes. Muhak lost 4 men. He killed 6 of the attackers himself. Jisuk took down 3 more. The remaining 3 retreated when it became clear the assault had failed. But the damage was done. Not to the penthouse. Not to the family. To Muhayak. He stood in the aftermath, surrounded by bodies and shattered glass, and understood with devastating clarity exactly what he had been risking. Not his empire. His family. The family he had built without meaning to. The family he had tried to prevent. The family that had grown around him like roots, binding him to something stronger than power or fear. When the panic room doors finally opened and 3 small boys rushed toward him screaming, "Father!" Muhayak fell to his knees and gathered them against his chest. For the first time in their lives, they heard him cry. The next weeks brought changes none of them expected. Muhayak began dismantling parts of his criminal empire. Strategic withdrawals. Legitimate business expansions. Careful redistribution of illegal operations to trusted allies who would continue without his direct involvement. He was not becoming innocent. He was simply becoming less visible, less vulnerable, less essential to the machine of violence he had built. "You're giving up power," Jisuk observed one evening. "For her. For them." Muhayak watched through the window as Nkiru taught the triplets how to make chin-chin in the kitchen, all 4 of them covered in flour and laughing. For all of them. Min-suk won't stop. "I know. But I'm not fighting him with the same weapons anymore." Muhayak turned to his oldest friend. "I'm fighting him with the only thing he doesn't understand. Which is something worth protecting. Something I'm willing to sacrifice everything else for." Jisuk studied him for a long moment. "You love her." Muhayak didn't answer immediately. Then, quietly, "I don't deserve to." "Probably not." Jisuk's expression softened. "But since when has deserving mattered?" The final confrontation with Cha Min-suk happened in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Seoul. It was not a battle. It was a negotiation. Muhayak arrived alone. Not because he was foolish, but because he understood something Min-suk never would. True power was not about destroying your enemies. It was about having something they could never take from you. "I'm offering you everything," Muhayak said, standing across from Min-suk in the dim industrial space. "The shipping routes. The security contracts. The distribution networks. All of it." Min-suk's eyes widened. "You're surrendering?" "I'm choosing." Muhak's voice was steady. "I'm choosing my family over my empire. I'm choosing to walk away from the war we've been fighting for 7 years. I'm choosing to give you what you've always wanted. In exchange for what? Safety. For her. For my children. A complete cessation of hostilities. Forever." Min-suk studied him suspiciously. "And I'm supposed to believe you won't rebuild? Won't come for revenge eventually?" "No." Muhayak pulled something from his pocket. A flash drive. "But you're supposed to believe this. Every transaction. Every alliance. Every secret operation for the past 15 years. If anything happens to my family, anything at all, this goes to law enforcement, international regulators, and every enemy you've ever made." Min-suk's face went pale. "You've been recording. I've been prepared. 4 years. I just never had a reason to use it. Muhayak set the drive on the table between them. Now I do. The silence stretched endlessly. Then, slowly, Minsuk reached for the drive. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yes, it is. Muhayak turned toward the exit. Because I'm walking away from everything you wanted. And you're going to let me. Because the alternative is losing everything you've built to take it. He didn't look back. When Muhayak returned to the penthouse, dawn was breaking over Seoul's skyline. Kiru was waiting for him in the living room. She had clearly not slept. Her natural curls were loose around her shoulders. Her eyes were red-rimmed. It's done, he said quietly. She didn't ask what he meant. She understood. What happens now? Muhayak moved toward her slowly. Every step felt heavier than the last. Every moment felt charged with possibility. I gave away most of my power, he said. My criminal empire. My influence. My everything. To protect you. To protect the boys. Kiru's expression didn't change. You didn't give it away for me, she said quietly. You gave it away for yourself. Because you finally understood that power wasn't protecting you. It was isolating you. He stopped in front of her. Close enough to touch. Close enough to see the tears forming in her eyes. I tried to scare you away, he whispered. I brought my children into your life as weapons. I expected their chaos to drive you out. I expected you to see my family and decide I wasn't worth the trouble. I know. I was wrong. About everything. Yes. A tear slipped down her cheek. You were. I don't know how to be soft, he said, echoing words he had spoken months ago. I don't know how to be gentle. I don't know how to love without controlling, without protecting, without... Muhayak. He stopped. Kiru reached up and placed her hand against his chest. Against the heartbeat that had been racing since the moment he walked through the door. I don't need you to be soft, she said. I need you to be honest. I need you to stop running from what you feel. I need you to be present, for me, for your sons, for the family we've somehow built without meaning to. Is that what we are? His voice cracked. A family? Yes. She smiled through her tears. Whether you planned it or not. Whether you wanted it or not. Those boys love me. Mrs. Adebayo has already threatened to adopt me if you don't. And you. She paused. I love you, she said simply. I have loved you since the night you sat in your kitchen and ate jollof rice with your children and looked at us like you couldn't believe we were real. Muhayak's hands came up to cup her face. His palms were rough. His touch was gentle. I love you, he said. The words came out raw. Broken. Like they had been trapped inside him for decades and had finally found a way free. I love you. I have loved you since you sat on my floor and spoke to my sons like they were human beings. I have loved you since you refused to be afraid. I have loved you since... He couldn't finish. Sonkiru finished for him. She pulled him down and kissed him. Not brief. Not desperate. Slow. Thorough. Kind of kiss that promises forever. The wedding happened 6 months later. It was small by Seoul standards. Intimate. Family only, which for Muhayak meant Nkiru, the triplets, Mrs. Adebayo, Jisuk, and a handful of trusted allies who had become something like extended family. Kiru wore white with gold accents. A fusion of Korean elegance and Nigerian tradition that made the triplets stare at her with open wonder. You look like a queen, Seo Hyun whispered when she knelt to adjust his tiny suit jacket. Thank you, my love. She kissed his forehead. You look like a prince. Father says we're supposed to protect you, Seo Jun added seriously. Like knights. Or ninjas, Seo Woo contributed helpfully. Knights are boring. Kira laughed. And across the room, Muhayak watched the woman who had changed everything laugh with his children and felt something he hadn't experienced in 38 years. Complete happiness. The ceremony was brief. The vows were private. But when Muhayak spoke his promises to love, to protect, to stay, his voice carried something new. Peace. He had built an empire on fear. Now he was building a family on love. And it was the bravest thing he had ever done. 2 years later, the penthouse was different. Not quieter. Not calmer. Triplets were 8 now, and their energy had only increased with age. Seo-jun had become fiercely protective of his mother. Yes, mother, because that's what Nkiru had become. Seo-woo was channeling his mischief into elaborate pranks that kept the security team on constant alert. Seo-hyun had started writing poetry and leaving it around the house for Nkiru to find. But beneath the chaos, there was stability. Muhayak's legitimate businesses thrived. His criminal past faded into rumor, then memory, then nothing. The man who had once terrified Seoul's underworld now spent his weekends teaching his sons how to cook Nigerian food and his evenings listening to his wife tell stories about her childhood in Lagos. He was not soft. He never would be. But he was present. He was honest. He was loved. And that was enough. On the morning of their 2nd anniversary, Nkiru woke to find Muhayak watching her. His dark gray eyes were peaceful in a way that still surprised her sometimes. "What are you thinking?" she murmured. "I'm thinking about the first day I brought the boys to meet you." "Ah." She smiled. "The day you tried to scare me away with 3 6-year-olds and a shattered teacup." "I was an idiot." "Yes. I'm grateful you're stubborn." "So am I." She reached up and traced the dragon tattoo that coiled down his neck. "So am I." In the next room, they could hear the triplets beginning to wake, arguing about something as always, their voices rising and falling in familiar patterns. "They're going to want breakfast," Muhayak observed. "They always want breakfast. And then chaos. Always chaos." Kiru sat up, her natural curls falling around her shoulders. "But it's our chaos." Muhayak pulled her back down beside him for one more moment. One more breath. One more reminder that the life he had never planned was the life he had always needed. "Ours," he agreed quietly. And then they rose together to meet their family. The feared Mafia boss who brought his triplets to scare away the woman he was beginning to love. The Nigerian woman who refused to run. The 3 little boys who just needed someone to stay. They had found each other against every odd. They had survived threats, enemies, and their own fears. They had built something stronger than power or reputation or the walls they had once hidden behind. They had built a home. And that home, filled with laughter and chaos and the fierce, stubborn love that had grown from the most unlikely beginning, would last forever. 'Cause love, Nkiru had learned, was not about finding someone who made everything easy. It was about finding someone worth the difficulty. And Muhayak had been worth every moment.